Welcome back everyone, this is Tom in Los Angeles and I'm going to talk about Canto 29 of Inferno today. I am starting with a little bit more energy than usual because unfortunately this is not one of the strongest cantos in Inferno, I have to say. I like it, but the relative comparison to all the other cantos that we've seen doesn't seem to hold. I'm not the only one to say, some commentators have noticed this as well. Clearly, there are some strong similes here as well, but nothing that is capturing our imagination as strongly as the previous cantos, especially considering the fact that we are so deep in Inferno. We are actually in the 10th bolgia, finally, in Male Bolge, still 8th circle, 10th bolgia. The scene that is punished here in this bolgia, in the 10th bolgia, is in general that of the alchemists. That's why we're still in the topic of fraudulence. Canto 29 and Canto 30 both deal with the 10th bolgia. In Canto 29 we're going to find the forgery of metals in particular, which was maybe the most famous from what we know about the traditional alchemy, from lead to gold, the ancient myth or the ancient legend or desire to transform metals, of course vile metals, into precious metals. And then in Canto 30 we're going to see the alchemists or forgers of persons, of coin and of words. So here there is at the beginning of Canto 29, there is a reference to the previous Canto 28, where when Dante delays his following Virgil, and that's why he's reprimanded by Virgil. He's also crying, he's in a very bad mood, but Virgil is not reprimanding him because of the crying. He's really telling him, why are you delaying? We should get going. Also because the overall journey in Inferno by Dante takes 24 hours in total, and these 24 hours reflect the time that it took Aeneas with the Sibyl. The Sibyl only was allowed Aeneas one day to visit hell in that ancient retelling. To make his case, Virgil tells Dante, look, consider that this valley, this bolgia, has a circumference of 22 miles. And in the next one, he's going to say that the next valley has a circumference which is half of this. So this providing numbers from Dante has created, obviously, an orgy of calculations from commentators and scholars. I wouldn't spend too much time on it because I don't find it too interesting. It doesn't seem like Dante is trying to tell us anything specific with these numbers. Only for the meaning here, Virgil is telling Dante, hey, it's huge. There are so many different souls. You cannot just stay here and wonder and pity these people. However, Dante explains something to Virgil that Virgil had not understood, which is, if you had given heed to what my reason is looking for, perhaps you would have granted a longer stay. Inside the hollow, where for a little lapse of time I gazed so steadily, I think a spirit of my own blood laments the guilt that brings so great a cost below. So, and Virgil says, okay, just, I understand now, but let's move on and go on. The story here is, and this is Virgil telling Dante that while Dante was busy speaking with Bertrand de Born, there was another soul, a condemned soul, who was in fact his relative, called Geri del Bello. Geri del Bello was a cousin of Dante's father, and he was a bit of a troublemaker in the family because he had been arrested a few times, and is mentioned here particularly because he was at a certain point murdered. He had been murdered, and not being avenged by anybody of Dante's family. Now, historically, this informs us about how typical was in Dante's times to think of revenge, especially for murders, as something noble, something that, the family nobility justified a revenge murder, let's say. However, Dante is telling us all this from a Christian perspective, and as a Christian, he obviously resists the logic of revenge. And in fact, we know in the Gospel already, Jesus had talked about that when comparing his new covenant with the ancient Jewish traditions of eye for eye, one eye for an eye. But Virgil explains that Jerry was looking at Dante while he was speaking with Bertrand during the previous canto, and Dante never looked at him. At this point, Dante says to Virgil, "His violent death, his murder, for which as yet no vengeance has been done by any of those he shares dishonor with, his family, is what has made him full of indignation." So he, in a sense, justifies, understands him, the indignation at least of the family. But the fact that he didn't address me and I didn't have the chance to talk with him or talk to him makes my pity for him greater yet. This is an interesting point, because what Dante is saying here is that he is struggling a little bit to fully reject the logic of vengeance. He does reject it, and he doesn't want his family to do it, to avenge this type of murder. But his pity for him is greater because he didn't have to talk to him. Had he talked to him, the compassion or maybe the emotional participation would have made things a little bit different for Dante. So they continue and they walk the ridge until they reach the spot. They are basically on top of the last bridge of Male Bolgie. They're looking down, everything is dark, and they are overlooking the 10th bolgia. Everything is very dark. However, immediately they are hearing strange laments. Whose shaft was barbed with pity. Great immediate way to express a lament, a cry that has something more sinister in it, more desperate about it. And Dante blocks his ears because they're so terrible to hear, these laments. The suffering was such that he compares it to people who were enduring diseases in Val di Chiana, all through September, in Maremma and Sardinia, all places in Italy where, especially in the summer until September, it was known that they had malaria outbreaks. So in this pouch, the condemned souls don't have something like malaria. They are more affected with something similar to, something worse, something similar to leprosy or a plague. But the simile talks about malaria-ridden places in Dante's Italy. And these are the shades or the souls, or those whose sin is to falsify. Dante continues and he goes back to his dear Ovid, his very dear Metamorphosis that we heard quoted so much through Inferno. In the Metamorphosis we find Aegina. There was an island whose population had fallen ill after, as per Ovid's story, Juno sent a plague to the island and so killed everyone on the island. That's what Dante is thinking of now. Everybody died, and afterwards the poets aver as certain the ancient populace was restored out of the seed of ants, something else that Ovid included in his Metamorphosis. Here we have the description of all these poor souls, condemned souls who are condemned for eternity to be suffering these terrible illnesses with similar to a plague, and always being itchy, not being able to stand up. It's a very graphic and realistic description. To add realism, Dante is talking about, Dante is bringing up similes from the homely and familiar type of world, the pan that's leaned against palm, too warm and dry, or the stable boy who knows that he is making his master wait. And they were scratching and digging, just like an assistant cook would be using a knife blade, scabbing for the scales from a carp, from a fish. So Virgil addresses them in a tone that matches the place where we are, and says, "Oh, you who with your fingers scrape the nail from your own flesh," and asks if there's anybody who is Latin and willing to speak with Dante. We know that these two forgers who are in this bolgia and they talk to Dante are Grifolino d'Arezzo and Capocchio. These two were both burned at the stake, and so they were known at the time in the contemporary history. They were fairly popular names. Grifolino d'Arezzo, burned for heresy. I died by fire at Albero da Siena orders. Dante recalls this ridiculous little story where this forger had promised somebody that he knew how to lift himself up in the air, he knew how to fly. And I failed to make this other, the victim of his fraud, a Daedalus of his own Icarus, which sufficed for him to have me burned. But the point of the story is not really in direct correlation with the punishment that he's suffering here. His punishment here is for forgery, for being an alchemist. And there would be a lot to say about alchemy, about the history of alchemy, especially in Dante's times, a little bit earlier, and up to Galileo's times and even Newton. I believe in even in Newton's books and notes, a lot of alchemic notes and alchemic comments have been found. So alchemy has always been there, and in fact, I looked this up, and alchemy is interesting. It's an Arab word. It comes from el-chemi, which means the chemistry, simply. So we're talking about medieval science, under a certain aspect. However, the big problem and the reason why we're finding them here so deep in hell is that very, very often, if not always, alchemy was practiced in secret, under a certain official respect of almost of science. The general public felt intimidated by alchemy because they didn't know, they didn't understand it. But also they didn't understand that alchemists themselves didn't understand what they were doing. They were looking to change metals into other metals. They were looking for this philosophical stone and all those legends. And also the two main goals of alchemy, if I understand correctly, throughout Europe were not only the big goal of creating gold out of iron or lead or something, but also to achieve something like a panacea, eternal life on earth, which from the Christian point of view, of course, was this tremendous sin of putting themselves in the place of God. So that, I believe, is the rationale for alchemy to be so serious of a sin. But not only that, there has also very often been an element of occultism associated with alchemy and worship of pagan gods or even the devil. So this is why it was made in a very secretive way. Even within the church structure sometimes. In fact, I believe it's in Notre Dame. in Paris, you can see some symbols within the church that indicate that some alchemists were living and practicing their arts right there in Notre Dame. And the same you can say for other churches or other religious buildings and monuments across Europe. So what Dante is trying to do here is also to try and do a social service by informing the people, the common people, that alchemy is a sin and is a fraud. He's trying to be useful to society because many people really didn't know. Towards the end of the canto, we have a weird little outburst on Dante's part. By now we're used to Dante's personality. He's gonna be the most humane and compassionate person 1 second, and the other second is gonna be this terrible guy. He's saying to Virgil as an exclamation, "Has there ever been another people as vain as the Sienese, people of Siena?" And to double down, he says, "Certainly not the French themselves, by far." So, double offense. Siena people and French people are all so vain, which if we think about what he said about people from Prato, people from Florence, this is almost a compliment. In any case, the other person who speaks to Dante, his name is Capocchio, he's another historical figure. Capocchio was burned as well, burned alive as alchemist in 1293. Here, Capocchio tells about a little bit of a dissipate way of living of many people in Siena, refers to cloves as a seed that was used in the local cuisine, but really is talking about how wasteful many people were in Siena, throwing banquets and parties where they were used to eat and then destroy all the service because they didn't care much about having respect for the material goods. And he concludes, "I am Capocchio's shade, the counterfeiter of metals by alchemy. If I trust my eyes, you recall how good I was at aping nature." The aping nature in the Italian version is the strong conclusion of the canto, which is "Com'io fui di natura buona scimmia," and scimmia means monkey or ape. But still, if we look at the canto overall, yes, we see a solid structure, a few horrific and disgusting images in line with everything else that we've seen so far. But at least personally, I don't see the same level of intensity and visual. There is nothing that really clings to my imagination or to my mind. And if I have to remember Canto 29 in the future, I'm going to remember it as one of the maybe weaker cantos. But I would love to hear what you think, and if you agree, if you disagree with this. It would be interesting to open a parenthesis and an aside about the history of alchemy, because that is such a fascinating portion of history. All these credences, it's a history that is linked to fraudulence, clearly, but not only. There were people who destroyed their own careers, destroyed their life because they were after this impossible dream of alchemy. The canto ends, as we can say in Italian, with the open curtains, because it will continue straight directly into canto number 30. So we're gonna speak about canto 30 in the next video. Thank you for watching.